hello, hello, hello. I am Pastor Rhonda, founder of Celebrate Life Cancer Ministry, and your host for Celebrate Life today. And Celebrate Life is a cancer support organization that helps all types of cancer survivors, including the caregiver. It's very important to us to make sure that the caregivers stay strong enough to take care of their loved one. And today, we are having a conversation with Shelly Rosen. Hi, Shelly. I'm sorry, I
Hi.
said your name. I didn't say your whole name. Shelly Rosenfeld.
That's right, you got it.
Hi, Shelly.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here, Pastor Rhonda, and I'm really excited to go over some important topics with you. I know we've collaborated in the past, and you've actually been on the Cancer Legal Resource Center, or CLRC's advisory panel, and I'm so grateful for this collaboration, and it's been really wonderful.
Yes, in fact, not too long ago, we sat on a committee with the cancer support community with the LA3C training information packet. We actually helped contributed to the manual and actually was part of the training, right?
That's right. I think we talked about how to be a good caregiver mentor, and I think that's so important. I mean, you talked about resources and information for someone affected by cancer, but also a caregiver, because that is a crucial part of going through the whole experience of being affected by cancer.
Right. And one of the things that I figured out is, everybody tends to be new to the situation. And while we're always expecting somebody else to know, but the cancer survivor was is just now being a cancer survivor. They don't know what's ahead. The caregiver is just trying to love them and to be a support to them, but they don't know what to do. So when the caregiver is asking the patient, what should I do? The patient is looking to the caregiver, what else can we do? And then we have someone like the Cancer Legal Resource Center. So when things get real rocky, we have a resource that we can go to learn more about it. So Shelly, why don't you just tell us all about it?
Sure. So, one great aspect of the Cancer Legal Resource Center is we provide free legal resources to those affected by cancer. Like you said, it's not only the person with the diagnosis, but anyone. It could be an oncologist or a caregiver, a relative, anyone that wants information. We will help them for free, no matter what. I always say if someone has $1 in the bank or $1 million, we don't charge ever. And we help people across the country, so I think that that's very helpful to know that we help people by a few different areas. One, of course, is making sure to get the information out there. So even if someone decides never to contact the CLRC, they'll be able to watch your program and learn a little bit more about just the information that might be helpful for them. But the main way that we help people is if they contact us through our online intake, they can fill out a few details about their situation, and then we will go to work and research and provide them, we'll call them back with information, and we'll also send them a letter. And if someone prefers to have a conversation instead of an online intake, they can call us toll free, and we ask those same questions that are on the online intake on the phone. Person doesn't have to do both to get a hold of us. It's either the online intake or the telephone call, and we'll help them just the same. We call back with information, but even if we can't reach the person, there's some people that it's hard to get a hold of on the phone. We send a letter either way. Even if we talk to someone, explain the information, we send a letter. But even if we don't talk on the phone, we still send a letter, either email or in the mail, whatever one prefers. So it's a great way to get information that could be helpful for that person's situation, both the federal law that applies nationwide, but also for their state. For example, if they're California, there might be national laws that help them, but also additional laws that California might provide.
So would they have to speak with someone, a specialist in another state if it is, say, Minnesota? Would they need to speak to a specialist there, or how does that part work?
It's a really good question. So we help people at the CLRC, whether they're in Minnesota, for example. The person will call up and explain to us where they live, for example, Minnesota, and even what county, because there could be local legal
Mm,
aids that can be helpful. So we do the research for them. we look up the Minnesota relevant information. We also have information as far as resources. For example, if someone is saying that they're getting a divorce and they want to make sure that their cancer diagnosis is not held against them when determining child custody. Even something like divorce could have cancer can be an effect on those and add additional challenges. So, for example, so if we have a professional panel member, we'll even refer to a divorce lawyer that we know in Minnesota. That's of course hypothetical if we have a divorce lawyer in Minnesota, for example, and we'll refer for a free half-hour consultation with that lawyer who has volunteered to provide a free half-hour consultation in advance. So in addition to all the resources, on top of that, if we do have a lawyer that has volunteered with us in advance to provide that information, we'll even refer to a lawyer there. So what we do is we make sure that at the minimum, we're providing the information relevant to that person, for example, in Minnesota, on their specific legal question. But if we have more, then we'll also give that referral for that free
Okay.
conversation.
Awesome, awesome. So, because I know that we have actually had the Cancer Legal Resource Center come out and conduct workshops for our cancer survivors. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes, one important component that we strongly believe in is to go to other community organizations and get the information out there, because there's some people that don't even know that the question or concern that they have is a legal issue. For example, sometimes someone will come to a support organization and say, I'm really stressed. I'm very depressed. And I'm usually not depressed, but after my cancer diagnosis, I'm feeling very depressed. And when it comes to, and you go a little deeper, you find out, well, maybe the reason that they're depressed is they're having really a lot of challenges getting their prescription covered by their insurance company.
Mm,
It's a newer treatment.
right.
They had so much hope, and then they call and they're so excited to embark on getting that in medication, and then their insurance company is saying, no, we're not covering it. So it is completely reasonable that someone would be upset about that and worried and sad. But sometimes they won't necessarily call the Cancer Legal Resource Center, even though we might be able to help them, because first, they don't even know that it's a legal issue. They don't even know that there might be a resource out there. They don't even feel hope. And so what's important is that we partner with organizations, we get out there, we do presentations about knowing your rights, um, learning about what might be helpful. I'll give you some examples: health insurance, employment, disability insurance, estate planning, landlord tenant issues. I talked about custody and guardianship of children. Um, Family law, just issues with potential toxic torts. And when I say that, I mean somebody believes that they might have been exposed to some chemical that might have caused their cancer, or just any type of, they're concerned about um, insurance coverage of some kind. So all of those and many more all of a sudden come into play. And so even if someone doesn't, for example, know what might be their potential issue, it's helpful to know that information in advance.
So we have someone who's asking the question. Michelle is saying, "What about losing your job because you're exhausted? Because you've exhausted your time to be off?" Oh, I had a lot of people share that question.
That's a really good question. And just before I answer that, I should say, even though I'm a lawyer licensed in California, DC, and New York, it's not technically legal. We make sure that people understand it's not attorney-client relationship, and I'm not providing officially legal advice. Lawyers love disclaimers, so I have to sound like a little bit of a lawyer before I answer that question. So very good question. Employment issues are very common. So, for example, and I'll answer this question generally in case, I obviously don't know all the details of Michelle's situation or anybody else, but I'll say the following. When someone, for example, needs to take time off, whether it's for treatment or recovery, what we'll say is, for example, somebody might have sick days at their work accrued, or even vacation time. Suppose that that's not, they've used that up, or they know that they need more time. Well, depending on whether they qualify, one option beyond that is to consider something called the Family and Medical Leave Act. FMLA. And basically, I'll go over it more generally just in case, and a person should look into whether that's helpful for them. This is a national law. Obviously, I don't know where this person is contacting us from. So the good news is that it applies nationwide. But FMLA allows someone to take up to 12 weeks. And to be clear, it's the person doesn't have to take all 12 weeks at one time, but they can take up to 12 weeks of unpaid job and health benefit protected leave per year to either take care of themselves or a covered family member. Now, I'd like to make sure to just clarify some things. It is unpaid, and I recognize the fact that getting money and having a salary is crucial. So I'm not minimizing that. It's still a challenge. However, what is important about FMLA leave is that if the person qualifies, and if the employer would be one that must provide it, a person can still keep their job and still keep their health insurance. Both of those. I'm making sure that it's on camera. Both of those, which is crucial, because even if somebody isn't getting that money, hopefully they don't have to take more than 12 weeks of leave per year. They can come back to their job and they can have their health insurance the entire time, which can make such a big difference for someone affected by cancer. Now, so protecting those job and health insurance benefits are important. Um, and it is not a form of income. There might be, other things with paid leave, but I'll keep it general for now. And not all employers, however, have to provide FMLA leave. Government, local, state, and federal employers do, as well as private employers if there are 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. I say that because, for example, let's say somebody's working at a Starbucks. Well, there might not be 50 employees in that particular Starbucks, but you better bet that there's more Starbucks locations within 75 miles, at least in California and probably many other places. So don't despair if your particular location only has a smaller number of people. It's within a 75-mile radius. Then that's something where FMLA will kick in. And then just to make sure that people understand, a person must have worked 12 at least 12 or more months. It doesn't have to all be consecutive. If you worked 6 months one year and 6 months the next year, as long as it adds up to 12 months, that's fine. And then the person must have worked 1,250 hours in that last year. It averages about 24 hours a week. So part-time employees may qualify. Now, I know that's a lot of details. A person doesn't have to memorize that. But the important thing is that somebody knows that there's more information out there, and that they have to sometimes, just take that next step and look it up or contact us, and they could get that additional protected leave. I just want to say one other point. Suppose a person needs more than 12 weeks. It happens where someone goes through treatment, someone goes through someone goes through the recovery process, and then unfortunately they have to resume treatment. It's just that's sometimes unfortunately a person's situation, or they might need more time. If a person needs over a year, they might be able to look into Social Security programs. Also, one other aspect is that under the ADA, which I can get into, but they might be able to ask for, if they qualify, some accommodation to extend that time a little bit if their employer is amenable. So I just want to make that point to say, as with someone experiences a cancer diagnosis, all of a sudden it feels like there's so many different problems. And that's true. On top of all the medical challenges, there's a whole list of non-medical side effects. But this question is a perfect example of the fact that with every challenge, there also are sometimes solutions. And it takes just a moment of someone believing and knowing that there's hope out there, that to know to take that step, and they might be surprised for the better. So I just always encourage someone to just explore it, to take a little bit of time. And you mentioned caregiver, you say, what can I do to help? When that caregiver says, a person can say, I think I listened to Pastor Rhonda and Shelly talk about some additional protections. Can you help me? Can you watch that with me? Or can you watch that when you have a lunch break? And let's see if we can find some solution, because I need to take time off. And that can make all the difference in someone's life.
Yes, because I remember having to call myself because actually after I had my mastectomy, and they They attempted to have reconstructive surgery, and things to me were not right. And they said, so when I went back to them, and it was a matter of, how do we make this right? And they're like, well, because in order to make it right for me, it would require prosthesis. And the doctors were not the doctors, the insurance people were saying, well, because you've already had reconstructive surgery, then that's it. And being totally frustrated, I said, hey, let me call the Cancer Legal Resource Center and find out, what do I do? And I didn't need an attorney. I just needed to know what to say to them when I called back. And when I called back and reminded them that they were to restore me to asymmetrical, to restore me to be asymmetrical, then all of a sudden it was a peace, and I got everything that I asked for from that point. But I just needed the words, because you could call and say, "But it's not right, and it's not this," and it could probably sounded like to them that I just wanted a perfected situation. But without looking at any records, without looking at me, they didn't know what they were making a decision on. But I got the right word, so I was better.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes it's just knowing some key words to use. You made a good point. You don't have to be a lawyer or even talk to one or have one represent you rather to achieve just a better outcome potentially. You just have to
Yes.
know a little bit more, just a little bit more, and making that difference. And I think that's great about the Cancer Legal Resource Center. We don't represent someone. We don't take someone on as a client. Like I mentioned, we sometimes refer out if there's a lawyer licensed in that state, just so someone who practices in that area and is an expert can get a little bit more into those details. But a person doesn't necessarily need a lawyer. That's the whole principle of the Cancer Legal Resource Center. They just need someone to get a little bit more information to them and hopefully put them in just that better position to advocate for themselves. And I think that's fairly empowering that someone knows, like in your situation, that you were able to already make such a big difference in your own life by just having that much more little information. And it's just such a wonderful success story. We oftentimes will help someone, but we don't ask for someone to get back to us. They already have enough on their plate. Everything's confidential, so we don't always hear about someone, you know, having that success story, and we don't follow up and, don't trouble someone. So just hearing that, it really warms my heart to know that some information was able to lead to a better outcome. And that's we're always rooting for someone to have the best possible outcome under the circumstances.
All right. So, Shelly, what other type of workshops or other topics does CLRC handle?
Sure. So one other topic that we talk about, and we make sure to go in the community, talk to different cancer support organizations or anyone that might want to hear a little bit more. We do talk about, for example, Social Security benefits. That's in the case of someone who is unable to work due to a severe medical condition that's expected to last at least a year or to result in death. And I think that some people think, well, gosh, I have to take more time off, or this treatment looks like it's going to be a longer process. And when it's over a year, there still are some government protections that could be helpful. And a lot of people start to lose hope when something might be just a longer process of, a doctor recommends just taking it easy for a little bit longer. And knowing that there are programs such as SSDI and SSI, especially information that can be helpful for someone that's affected by cancer that maybe didn't think about certain programs before, can be especially helpful. And I think that that's, for example, just one step that we'll try to educate people about, for example, SSI, supplemental security income, that's based on assets and income, not work history. But if someone's been in the workforce, a lot of times people are working, they're in the best of their health, and then they get a cancer diagnosis and everything changes. So that's SSDI, Social Security Disability Income. And that's based on a work history. So somebody that has worked and, for example, has earned, at least 40, what they call work credits. and it's basically earning a certain amount. And even if someone is self-employed, a lot of times people will be like, well, they'll ask, well, I haven't worked at a large employer. I work for myself. If the person is taking out money for self-employment income and paying into that, they still may qualify. So I think there's a lot of information that people are just, they don't even, they're intimidated to even look into. But
Shelly, can we pause just right there for a
sure.
moment? Because one of the, I wear a lot of hats. And one of the other things that I do in my life is I help businesses come together and grow their business. And when a couple of years ago, as COVID kicked in, um, there were a lot of businesses who could not take advantage of the business stipends or the funds available to businesses because they don't indicate how they pay themselves. So
Oh,
technically, they still look unemployed because there's no trail of paying themselves. So that's a very important point because I'm sure that there will be some entrepreneurs and small business owners who's going to watch this. Even because sometimes cancer or your health causes you to need to start something, because you can't, a job is not going to allow you to go to 1,000 doctor's appointments. It's not going to allow you to not feel well today and start at 10 rather than at 7. So sometimes it's just better to start your own business, especially since we're still skilled, we're still talented, we still have abilities, we just don't have them 24/7 like we used to. So
right.
but thank you for bringing that up. Yes, so even now, if you are an entrepreneur and you have health challenges, I say to you, pay yourself. Even if it's not what you wish you could be making, pay yourself.
That's such an important point, and it really someone going through treatment, dealing with all the challenges, whether it's insurance, um, certain side effects, it could be like taking on another job. So sometimes, like you mentioned, it it requires someone to change course a little bit professionally or otherwise. And actually, that brings me to another point about reasonable accommodations and being able to have that conversation if somebody wants to. The question of whether to talk about cancer with the employer and even to go down that route of asking for accommodations, it's a really personal decision. Some people look for an easy answer, and I totally understand. I completely respect someone saying, I never want to mention it to my employer. I'm going to go do the best I can. And it's my personal journey. I don't want to tell, I don't, I maybe want, I only want to tell Pastor Rhonda, but I don't want to tell anyone else. I respect that completely. That is up to that person and their comfort level. They only owe to themselves to do what they feel right. There are other people that do find comfort in sharing with others, and I completely respect that too. And then there's people that are saying, well, I don't really want to talk about it with a lot of people, but I do want to see if my work can accommodate me in some way. I can mostly do my work, but I would like a little bit of support as I go through this. And for that, there is something called the American with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and it works to protect from discrimination at all phases of employment. That's talking about interview throughout the job. And a lot of people with cancer, they don't necessarily think that they would qualify for any type of protection under something called American with Disabilities Act. It's not called, it doesn't have cancer in the name. And like I said, they might have been in their best of health before that diagnosis, but all of a sudden something really changes. So one other aspect when it comes to job support is the ADA, and it can really be helpful for someone if they do qualify for that protection to get that help. And I just want to mention before I forget, because we talk about different resources, the Cancer Legal Resource Center, we have something called the Patient Legal Handbook, and it's available
Oh,
online.
yes, yes.
It is free. It is in Spanish and in English online, but also we will send it to an office, doctor's office, a bulk order. I don't think an individual person needs 50 of them, but we'll send to an office or an support organization for free. So that organization, if somebody's listening, they can order it and have it in case somebody wants a physical type of booklet. It's not heavy. It's just pretty thin, and it goes over a number of topics, whether it's advanced planning, thinking about how someone wants to allocate their property or care for their pets, um, or anything from job or health insurance information. And it's very helpful to just kind of get an overview and some helpful tips. So I just wanted to mention that as we talk about different issues, to make sure that people know that even, they can have a little bit a booklet that can be helpful for them. And it's available online if somebody wants to access it, but we also have paper copies too.
And it's also very easy to read. So that I found that because I saw not this version and the one before. So it both of them very easy to read, very easy to find the information that you're looking for. So and so Shelly, go ahead and send us a few. So if anyone reaches out to us, then we can just drop it in the mail to them one by one.
That would be wonderful. Yes, and I look at it and I work in this area because it's just such a helpful refresher course of, gosh, here's the main points I want to take away. And I do believe that if information is clear, if it's not clear, no one's going to understand it, no matter how helpful that information is. I remember I actually worked as a journalist before becoming a lawyer, and I was working with a news writer one time, and I wrote something very confusing. I think maybe I was trying to be a little bit fancier. And I said, "Why do I have to dumb it down?" And he said, "Not dumb down, clear up." And that really changed my
Mm,
life, because it's not, when I say to you something that's clear and direct, it's not, I'm not, I'm not making it so called easy. It's still the same helpful information, but it takes actually more effort to understand it and to convey it in a way that's helpful for someone that's hearing it for the first time. So I
right,
actually think that there's tremendous strength and tremendous knowledge, and it's being an expert that knows how to share information that's clear. And if somebody wants more details, they can always take another step. But that's one of the reasons why I think the CLRC, we really make that information clear. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful aspects of sharing that information and those details. I touched upon reasonable accommodations, and I'll just say the following. If a job has 15 or more employees, it protects against discrimination if somebody qualifies for protection, meaning somebody has an impairment that limits a substantial life activity. So cancer can be considered a disability under the ADA. And I think that that's something that can be really helpful for someone to understand when they're on the job. And we always say, if somebody wants to request some kind of accommodation, request it before work performance is affected. Because if an
right.
employer doesn't know, if your boss doesn't know that maybe you're more fatigued and you need to sometimes put your head down for a few minutes, or maybe you have to take a few more breaks because of, you have to have a snack or you have to use the restroom a little bit more. If they don't know that, and that's all they see is that you're taking more breaks, that could lead to potentially an adverse employment decision, because the employer has no idea that there's a completely logical explanation. It's not that you're not doing your job, but they just might have to allow for that, and they know that you're still being able to do your job. That brings to the second part of what qualifies someone for this protection potentially, is being able to do the essential functions of the job. The ADA does not give someone a job in or let them have it if they are not able to do the job. I am not a doctor, and it would not make me be able to be a doctor. So I just want to be clear about that. It's when you can do the essential functions of the job and when you have an impairment. So it kind of levels out the playing field. A good example of a reasonable accommodation, it should be reasonable on both sides. The employer is not supposed to go out of business trying to make you be able to keep your job, but it also has to be reasonable for that person. They can't just say, okay, we'll let you take one other 5-minute rest break. Maybe you need a few more. A good example that I like to use, because people often ask, what's a reasonable accommodation? It really depends on that person's job. However, suppose someone is a cashier and they
Mm,
have to stand for long periods of time. This kind of helps, I think, bring it home. A reasonable accommodation is, suppose they're going through treatment and they need to sit down from time to time, that perhaps their employer would provide them with a stool so that they could, or a chair of some kind, so that if they need to sit down, they could still do their job. They're still able to be a cashier, but they can sit down when they need to. And I think that that's just an example that kind of helps me think about, it's reasonable about both sides. Maybe they don't get their, private office because they have to be with people, but they can get something that can make them be able to do their job and to do it optimally, hopefully. So I think that that can be very helpful. A lot of people want to keep working, not just for the money, but just for a sake of normalcy, and to know that despite going through something that is fairly different, that they can still stay very true to themselves as much as possible. And so consequently, the ADA can be a real game changer. Of course, if someone, as we covered, needs to take time off, that's completely understandable. And there are those protections. But if someone wants to keep working and thinks that they can still do so, there's a way to keep their job and keep that income coming in with just a few changes.
So would they need to put that request in writing, or can they just let their boss know, their supervisor know that these are some challenges? Because earlier you mentioned that there's some people don't want to reveal what it is. Because even speaking of that, even the doctor's release form, there should be one that doesn't tell what the illness is. It's just that the doctor is requesting it. So
You
does
bring
it
up
have to be in writing?
Yeah, you bring up such a good point. I mean, I think that there is something called a medical certification that an employer can request, and I think that there's one thing I want to mention because you bring this up about privacy. First of all, I think that so, an employer knowing someone's specific diagnosis, that's not going to help them. If someone says that they have breast cancer, how does the boss know? Breast cancer can be so different for so many people in terms of treatment, stage. That doesn't give the employer any information. They don't need to know that. What they do need to know potentially are, for example, if the employee is experiencing fatigue and might need some more frequent rest breaks. If, for example, treatment could lead to nausea and suppose they're not allowed to have food at their desk, maybe they can have food at their desk. And it's nobody else's business at the job. The employer doesn't have to know why, but they might need to have that proof because unfortunately there are some people that might not tell the truth. So sometimes they have to have the employer in order to make these exceptions must have some kind of documentation. But you bring up a good point. It doesn't have to come necessarily from an oncologist's office because if someone has oncology at the header, that employer will know that it's some kind of cancer diagnosis and a person may not want to share that information. Having said that, they if their internal medicine doctor agrees, because the internal medicine doctor can see the records of an oncologist, so they can definitely explain what side effects or symptoms the person is experiencing and can say, for example, leg pain or whatever it is from a medical perspective. And then the employee can talk to the employer, for example, either human resources department or whoever is the point person that has that responsibility to keep that information separate from the employee personnel file, but in a separate place. So oftentimes, that has to be in writing. It can't just be the doctor calling up. There are some forms, but a person can take certain steps that never disclose that diagnosis to that employer. And hopefully their general practitioner or their internal medicine doctor can be helpful in that. They'll have that information, and the person should talk to the internal medicine doctor and explain, because the internal medicine doctor might not know that the reason that the patient is coming to them is to actually share certain information, but to keep certain information from the employer that the employer doesn't really need in order to help the patient. So it's helpful to have that conversation and not jump to any conclusions that their doctor for sure knows what the patient really needs from them. I think it's important to communicate, and hopefully any internal medicine doctor will understand and respect patient privacy in that regard and still share that information. So that's a really practical tip that a lot of people don't think about because they're worried about their job, they're worried about their treatment, they're not able to think of everything all at once, and that's totally reasonable. So you bring up a good point. Maintaining privacy, you can always share more later, but there's no reason, if you don't feel comfortable, to share that information up front, especially when it won't necessarily make a difference in accommodations.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So, is there any other topic that we would like to cover today? And maybe there's a couple of people watching right now. So, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box, and we will address your questions as well.
I guess the last topic that I would just want to raise is about advanced planning. A lot of people think that they have to have a very fancy palace to write up some kind of will or something like that. And I would say not at all. But it can also be a hard thing to think about, especially after a cancer diagnosis. So I'll say the following. So far, no one has lived forever. And so at some point, unfortunately, we won't live forever. It's hard to think about that at any point. So it's a good idea for someone to recognize that they can make their wishes live on after they do. And if they don't write something down and create some kind of document that will express those wishes, that the state will give them one anyway. So wouldn't it be better? Don't they think that they know what they want to happen more than an entity that doesn't know them at all? And it doesn't mean a bad omen or anything. It's just actually a way to empower someone to say, even if they don't have that much, to think about who they'd like, whatever they have to go to. And it doesn't even have to be money. It could be who cares for their pet if they have a pet. And hopefully they'll live many, many, many years. And they can always change it later. But just to start that conversation, and maybe they have a neighbor in mind or a friend, but that friend actually, has a dog allergy that they didn't even know about. So
Mm.
it's helpful to sometimes have those conversations and say, it doesn't mean anything bad, but I'd just like to know, is this something I'd like you to care for XYZ, or I'd like you to have this. Is that okay with you? Or just even so, if someone has just some other assets that they would like to give to someone, that they could decide for themselves in advance. They can always change it, but to decide where they'd like that to go. And I think it could be a great way to just feel like they can live on in a sense, and think of it in that positive way. So, sometimes people will call us, when there's kind of this time where it's crisis mode and they don't know what to do. And it's think about that in advance. I think that there's information out there, whether will and trust, they can contact us to find out what might be right for their situation and how to do so in a really cost effective way.
Wow, so that's really good because someone actually called me yesterday and they're like, "Look, don't panic with this question that I'm about to ask, but do you know somebody that I can talk to so that I can begin putting my information in order?" But you know what? Even whether you're sick or not, we should be planning for that time. And like you said, you can definitely change it. I have my living trust put together, but can you talk a little bit about the difference between a living trust and a will?
Sure. So, a will is kind of this document, and I'll say that it depends on state law. And so, California has different requirements, and there's also ways to make sure that someone can follow. Just there's some forms out there, and a person can guide someone through it. But there's some that require certain types of steps. A trust, sometimes if someone has a living trust, they want it basically to account and have a trust, someone to handle the trust. It can sometimes be for in some cases, larger types of assets are more complicated and can help avoid probate, which is kind of a little bit more of a complicated process. Um, if
Mhm.
someone if someone has a living trust, then they kind of can add something to that says, okay, if I haven't thought of something in this trust, it can go over into a will. So it's just a little bit more kind of procedure, but can add a little bit more protection to kind of avoid the longer process of probate as well. But even if someone just starts out with a will and says, here is what I have, if they have a bank account, sometimes it's better to go through the bank and use their paperwork and refer to that too, and say, that they have a bank account at XYZ. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but just that they know whatever they have. Who knows? They might win the lottery the next day. Whatever they have will go to this person. So it just allows for some information. And I think, especially as a result of the pandemic, people recognize that even if someone doesn't have a cancer diagnosis, it's a good idea to just to recognize that health is precious, things can change, and why not take that step in advance? I say that, and it could be a lot to think about. A person doesn't have to draft it in an hour, but maybe just to get a little bit deeper as to what's involved and to do kind of at least a first version that can help express what they would like. And I think that can be very helpful. So
Yeah.
to think about that in advance.
And we shouldn't be afraid to do it.
Right.
Should not be afraid. Yeah. So, yeah, because I know a lot of people, like, if it's like, say, if I were to ask somebody, you know, close to me, do you have your papers in order? Do you have a will? Do you have, they're like, what are you wishing me to be gone? No, no,
Right.
no. I'm just trying to save some time later. Just
It's a
some save some
touchy
time
sub.
later. It is. And I tend to bring it up when someone passes away because now the topic's on the table.
That's
Like,
true.
how's your stuff? So that's the time that I utilize to slide the conversation in.
Right. It's an important, you're absolutely right. And I think that it can be, it's a touchy subject in the sense that it, a person, like you say, people read into it because it's not yet discussed. So one aspect, and the reason why I like to bring it up just as a general conversation point, is to make it more normalized that it doesn't mean anything. I'm not saying
Right.
it because we're having this happens to be our discussion. It's just information that's helpful for someone and that anyone should do. It's not because someone has cancer. It is just because so far, like I said, no one has lived forever. We all try, but no one has done that. It's hard to think about. So I always say set it and forget it, but not completely forget it, but set it and just let it be, knowing that you have it in place. Sometimes when you actually do it, then you can focus on so many other great things in life, but knowing that whatever happens, that you've at least protected what you have, and that could be done exactly as if you were living and could decide that. So I see it as a more powerful thing that we can kind of live on beyond your years, and hopefully there are many years ahead. So that's just how I like to think about it. And I raise it because I think it's important for someone to think about it on their own. They don't have to tell anyone that they're doing it, and to just explore that. And when they feel ready, they just might start to be thinking one day and just kind of do something at least in advance. And they don't have to tell everyone what they're doing or who gets what. It actually, and I just want to say, it can be a very loving thing, because if there are multiple children or there are multiple people that are in that person's life, it actually takes those difficult conversations out from those people and can preserve those relationships, because ultimately it's been stated what that person wishes. So it's nothing personal. People don't have to argue about something. Hopefully they wouldn't, but it kind of, I actually think, preserves other relationships that are existing by doing that. So I will say that from a positive place, it can be very empowering. So I just figured to mention that. And we do provide free resources and confidential resources about that.
So, do they have to have a structured form, or can they just write it out and say, "This is my will and testament"? Because there's online applications. You can go pay. I think I heard somebody say $5,000 for a living trust, or and less. I know people that do them for way less than that. But so, can I just get a piece of paper and write this out? Does it have to have certain verbiage on it? How does that part work?
Oh, that's another really great question. So I know this will be viewed potentially by others outside of the state of California. So California does allow for a handwritten will, but it does have some other, um, you know, processes to make sure to make it valid. Because one of the most important things, right, if it's advanced planning, when it comes into effect, the person is no longer able to say, no, this isn't my will. So there have to be witnesses or other signatures in some cases, but it depends on state by state. So each state differs a little bit, and some just have more requirements. So I would definitely say the person, based on that state, can contact us. We'll give a little bit more tips if they can do it on their own. But person doesn't have to spend a lot of money. You bring up a good point. There are statutory, which basically means forms that a state can provide. For example, California has one. There are some organizations, support organizations, that have really affordable ones that follow the state's rules. So somebody can look up California or Arizona or Minnesota and do it according to those requirements. And it doesn't have to cost a lot. We generally say, someone can always do more, but at least to do one that's valid and to follow those requirements, so that no one can say, oh, no, 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 that's not a valid will because you didn't follow these kind of minor things about getting a
Mhm.
witness or something like that. So there are protections out there, but I like to see it as more to make sure that only the true will survives, and only the true
Okay.
will exists. I'm not expecting that there will be wills out there that aren't yours, but I'm not trying to worry anyone. But they're there to make sure that things are accurate and that it is it is indeed the correct procedure, in that it's to protect the person and their wishes. So there are some requirements, and it doesn't have to be some fancy, they don't have to talk to some trust and estates lawyer from a big fancy law firm. They can do it more on their own. There are some organizations, and our patient legal handbook has some tips. They can also contact us to just to get that ball rolling for some information.
Awesome. All right. So, what's our next topic?
Oh, well, I guess yeah, we have a little bit of time left. Um, I think that one important kind of way to potentially wrap up is just to talk about health insurance and the fact that there there are a few different options. If someone is leaving their job, they may want to consider Cobra. For example, it is more expensive, but if someone likes their doctor and likes their coverage, then they could potentially keep it for the time that they're going through treatment. There are some time limitations, but it can be helpful if someone's status changes at their job unexpectedly. There are ways to keep their health insurance. There's also state marketplaces, in and as well, for example, California has some health insurance options, and someone can look if they qualify for tax credits based on their income. And also, certainly, if someone needs coverage, they can always contact the insurance company directly, but that does sometimes mean it's more expensive. And just to be aware that if someone wants to choose a different health insurance, it's important for them to recognize that they should look at whether their doctor would be accepting their new insurance, and whether the treatments that they're currently going through and potentially possible treatments they should have that conversation with their doctor would be covered. Because somebody might say to themselves, I'd like to save money on my insurance, I don't need all this other stuff, I'd like to save money. But health insurance doesn't really matter to someone if the three things that they need or two things aren't actually helpful. And if they
Yeah.
really like their doctor, then another insurance might not do. It could end up costing them more in the long run if they don't keep the insurance that they're happy with. So I'll say that general point. And also, if something is denied in insurance, it's always a good idea to appeal. There's person might have to go first through an internal appeal and go through that process. But if that is still denied internally, a person can go and do an external appeal. But I want to make sure that people understand that a lot of times the information about deadlines, which are crucial, is in that denial letter. So people get something in the mail and they see denial and they don't want to look at the rest of the letter. I totally get it. Look at the rest of the letter, because the information, even though if you don't want to look at it, I totally understand, but get over it for a moment just to see the deadlines on the appeal, because the insurance company is required to tell you deadlines and information for the appeal when they deny you. So look at that information, because a way that you can blow an appeal is missing that deadline. And why give the insurance company on that technicality the reason to deny you? Do it, fight for your rights. And understandably, time is of the essence. I'm not telling someone to not go through that, to go through treatment because they're waiting on an appeal, but they may be able to continue with their treatment, or even if they have to pay temporarily a little bit more for their treatment, but they may get it covered in the end. There are many times where people just don't even try to appeal, but I would say give it a shot. At worst, it will still be denied, but just try. And a doctor can be helpful. They've likely, unfortunately, had to help someone appeal in the past, maybe even for that same treatment. So they might already have something in place that they can help you as to why it's
Mm.
medically necessary. So I definitely urge people to, when it comes to health insurance, if something is denied, and sometimes, unfortunately, the best treatments are denied because they're considered still experimental, or there's some other treatment that works but isn't as good. But you deserve the best treatment. So I always say to people, try to appeal. I don't know what they'll decide, but it's worth a shot. I believe that person's worth a shot. So I definitely recommend to appeal if you can. Work with your doctor in terms of explaining and getting their support as to why it's necessary based on that person and circumstances. And you can always talk to the doctor about what to do in the meantime. But certainly it's important to do that, and if possible, to request an expedited appeal, if that is all possible, to do that, and you might get an answer sooner than you realize.
Very good. And that's just like my situation. I had to appeal. It's like, no, no, this is not good enough. So,
Exactly.
Shelly, this has been marvelous just to have this conversation. We've had a couple of people chime in and, like the conversation. So, this is good. We'll have to do more later. Maybe we'll even take one of the topics and just walk through the whole topic.
Exactly. I would
So,
love that. It's been a joy as always, Pastor Ron, to talk with you. I always enjoy our conversations. And I'm so excited to have others take part and listen in and hear our conversation. And even if they didn't have questions, hopefully they've gotten some questions answered throughout this
yeah.
process.
Exactly. So we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up. And, as we always say, be sure to choose life when you're going through and you have to make a decision. What decision is best for me? The one that will bring you life. So until next time, choose life.